A Kroger executive has admitted to price gouging customers. While testifying to an FTC attorney on Tuesday, Kroger's senior director for pricing, Andy Groff, admitted that the grocery chain had raised prices for eggs and milk beyond levels of inflation. The questioning came during a court hearing for Kroger's FTC suit after the retail giant announced that it wanted to merge with Albertsons, which would give the already large retailer even more market share, which would not be good for consumers. You would end up seeing prices rise even more. In fact, according to an internal email sent by Groff to other Kroger executives, he showed that the price of eggs and milk routinely surpassed what inflation would require for the chain to still make a massive amount of profit. Quote, milk and eggs retail inflation has been significantly higher than cost inflation. And, well, there it is.
Oh my God, he admitted it.
Of course, a Kroger spokesperson immediately had to backtrack and be like, oh, no, that's not what he meant. That's not what he meant. Talking to Bloomberg, they said that Groff's comment was, quote, cherry-picked. Oh, really? Cherry-picked. On milk and eggs, retail inflation has been significantly higher than cost inflation. It seems to be pretty straightforwardly admitting that retail inflation, mainly how much we are inflating the prices, is more than cost inflation, what it costs for us to go and purchase the items that we're going to sell. There's really no way to cherry pick that one. So nice try, though. But says, this does not reflect Kroger's decades-long business model to lower prices for customers by reducing its margins.
Bullshit.
Really?
Okay. Now, Drew Powers, the founder of Illinois-based Powers Financial Group, told Newsweek of the admission, quote, this is not at all surprising. Well, yeah. Companies across multiple industries have been posting record profits since the COVID-19 crisis, while consumers have faced the highest inflation in recent history. The math can only point to companies raising prices above the general level of inflation. As the old saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. And they didn't. Look, I love this admission because you had all these pro-business outlets and groups that are screaming, crying, and crapping themselves. And, whenever somebody points out, hey, you're posting record profits, but you're saying that your costs have gone up, how is that possible? Your costs, yes, have gone up a little bit, but you've decided to pad your pockets by putting a lot of extra costs on top of us, passing it along to the consumer, and then filling your pockets and claiming, oh, it's the inflation. No, it's not just the inflation, it's the greedflation on top of it. That's the real problem, okay? So now economists have already long indicated that the grocery sector specifically, which is highly consolidated by huge chains like Kroger and Walmart, is allowed to do this. They were benefiting from supply chain disruptions during the pandemic, allowing the companies to hike the prices beyond what was necessary to retain their record profits. Comments like this, says Alex Bean, despite their honesty, call into question the explanations Americans have been given for the last 3 years on inflation. Now, Alex Bean happens to be a financial literacy instructor for the University of Tennessee at Martin, so you might know what he's talking about. Supply chain issues, rising shipping costs, and increased wages certainly played their part in higher prices that we're currently seeing. Combined, less than half, all right? Now, they said, however, the admission some prices were elevated simply because the businesses knew they could doesn't help the case for those arguing price gouging isn't an issue. People aren't stupid. We can see what's going on here. We can see that greedflation, according to studies, is behind over half, 50% of the price increases. So, look, the rest of it can be explained by, yes, we had supply chain issues. Those were serious. There were shipping costs. Again, all this caused by the pandemic, which raised, their costs for doing business. I get it. And then, on top of it, you add in oh, but we decided to, take advantage of inflation, take advantage of this, and take advantage of our consumers, and we've reaped massive profits. Greedflation. Now, how this relates to the Albertsons and Kroger merger, remember, it will do more consolidation, which will allow these companies to get away with it because there is not competition. Again, what happens when you get monopolies or near monopolies? You end up having higher prices for consumers and higher profit margins because people really don't have any other alternatives. Again, if you have 2 or 3 mega corporations that own 80% of the market, you're not really going to have a competition on who can lower prices. If anything, there's going to be a silent collusion, implicit price fixing by these giant megacorps, okay? And what that is basically companies will continue to allow each other to raise prices just a little bit and not undercut them by too much, all right? Let me give you an example here. So say you've got whatever widget or whatever, snack food that they let the price on it rise by 50 cents over time. And then they start doing sales for 10 cents off. And this is without their, input costs rising to a significant degree. Perhaps their input costs gone up by 5 cents, right? Well, so now they're still pocketing quite a bit, 35 cents, if they're doing the sale at 10% and had, risen their costs by, or had their costs rise by 5%, and had actually passed down the consumer price increases of 50 cents overall. So you're still pocketing about 35 cents. That's a huge amount of profit on this hypothetical snack food widget, whatever, what have you. Now, as Powers points out, they're doing this because they have no competition and no repercussions for price gouging. Quote, there's not just one bad apple in this bunch. Historically, corporations guilty of price gouging have faced relatively light repercussions when compared to the profits made from the offense. It will be interesting to see if Kroger is hit harder this time around as these allegations have come to light during FTC hearings in their bid to acquire Albertsons. Now, that remains to be seen whether or not they will be hit with repercussions and consequences for doing what they're doing, maybe in the denial of their merger. Now, Kevin Thompson, a finance expert and founder of the CEO of 9i Capital Group, says, look, yes, Groff's comments highlight a large trend. Quote, moved away from true capitalism towards an oligarchic structure with less competition and larger players dominating the market. This shift, driven by a focus on shareholder interest, has diminished consumer choice and competitive dynamics. Now, I happen to think that this is a natural conclusion to free market deregulation and small government. That is what happens. What happens when government shrinks? Private industry grows, okay? And it grows, and it grows, and it consolidates, and then runs the market. That's not good for us. That destroys competition. Now, he added that the pricing strategy was likely implemented to what? Maximize profits. Because that's the entire purpose of a corporation, is to maximize shareholder value, okay? And they do that by increasing profits. And they do that by increasing the prices of their shares. And they can do that through consolidation. And they can also do that by acquiring smaller companies, loading them off with debt, and then and then liquidating them. We have seen this. We've seen this with Red Lobster. We're seeing this with Rite Aid. We're seeing this with all these different companies that are also going out of business because private capital will come in, they'll buy them up, and then they'll load them up with debt, and then they'll strip them for parts. And that's bad for not only workers, but then it's also bad for competition, for the economy. And so, yes, we're seeing that with fast food, but we're also seeing this slightly different thing happening with grocery as these giant mergers keep happening that are going to screw over and are screwing over consumers. And so now, that said, he does not think that anything will happen to Kroger to, you know, any sort of consequences to prevent them from doing this in the future. That said, finance expert Michael Ryan says, don't be so sure. Quote, this is like catching a kid with their hand in the cookie jar. And instead of denying it, they proudly announced, yep, I took them all. Kroger's not alone in this game. I bet my last dollar that other big players like Walmart and Publix are pulling similar stunts. And he thinks that the FTC actually might be able to do something about it. Now, look, Lena Khan, head of the FTC, is a consumer advocate, and she's a strong consumer advocate, which is why LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman and other, heads of big corporations despise her. They do not like her. They're lobbying an incoming Harris administration to fire her. And of course, in a Trump administration, well, obviously she'd be fired. And a pro-business, pro-consolidation, pro-monopolistic, head of the FTC, essentially a business crony, would be put in her place to then greenlight all this stuff, which would, again, hurt consumers, drive up prices, and drive down wages. And so that's the overall plan, right? Now, I hope she is going to push for as tough as a consequence as she's legally allowed to do, and I hope it's incredibly strong, and I hope she denies the merger. Whether or not actually happens, I don't know. And whether or not whatever, she's able to do deters these large chains from, doing all this stuff remains to be seen. I think a lot of companies out there are expecting this, and a lot of the fines that we have seen from government organizations and agencies haven't really been effective at deterring them because, look, what happens with these fines is they're pennies compared to what they made in ill-gotten gains. And so, that said, Ryan is hoping that the admissions will force shoppers to go elsewhere. I do think, though, that there's a problem with that. With so much consolidation in the market nowadays, there's not a lot of choices, okay? Not everyone is able to do that. Also with, food deserts. And of course, food deserts are places like, for example, in inner city urban areas where you don't have smaller grocery stores, okay? Where you don't even have some of the larger grocery stores, the Walmarts, etc. Like in some places in Minneapolis, for example, they don't have a Walmart. And so you have a lot of citizens that end up having to shop for food at overpriced gas stations, things like that massively mark up their food. And so, you have these issues with no competition. You have smaller stores that continue to get pushed out of business by larger stores like Walmart's coming into town. And then you have all this consolidation. And on top of that, you've got price gouging. And of course, also to add to, the horrible shit cherry on top, you have wages that continue to be stagnant as a result of not raising the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, or in red states, the state minimum wage, keeping those artificially low. And so, look, that's a lot of problems. And they're not going to be fixed in 1 4-year term. That's if Harris is lucky enough to beat Donald Trump in the first place. Okay? What we have to do, though, is ultimately we do need a government that's going to hold these companies accountable and to do what we individuals cannot. And I'm just waiting to see whether or not the FTC is going to have the power to be able to do that. I'm cautiously optimistic that Khan will, since she is against these monopolies, she'll be able to stop this merger. And with Harris making a campaign issue out of this price gouging and putting, together a plan to attack price gouging that corporations have already hated, publicly hated on, maybe it's enough to try to incentivize them to put a stop to it. I don't know. This is why industry lobbyists have flooded Washington, D.C., hoping to push the merger, because if this merger happens, again, Kroger and Albertsons, they're going to have a gigantic amount of market share, and it's going to be them Walmart, and maybe a couple of others that have control of pretty much our entire food supply at this point as retailers. And so if this merger somehow gets approved, which I really, really hope and doubt that it will, things will only get worse. And so I think there's only one course that's going to be good for consumers, and that is not only stopping this merger, but the FTC holding Kroger accountable for their massive anti-consumer practices. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you can become a member on our YouTube page, you can become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.